Welcome to Sonara's Deep Dive.
Imagine a world where the simple act of sweeping a temple floor, or even just placing a little clay offering in your window, wasn't just a chore or a nice gesture, but an actual mechanism, a piece of, cosmic engineering designed to keep the sun rising.
To keep the stars in their place.
Yeah.
We're stepping way past the Sphinx and the postcard pictures of sun-baked monuments today.
We really are. We're trying to move beyond history as just a timeline of events.
Right. We're diving into the interior architecture of Egyptian belief. The physical world they built, all those temples and pyramids, was really just a mirror of a much deeper spiritual reality.
And that brings us right to this core idea, this philosophical premise, gnosis.
Yes.
Okay, let's unpack this right away. Because gnosis is a word that gets, I think, misunderstood a lot in modern terms. It is not just information, is it?
Absolutely not. It's not something you can just read in a book.
Yeah.
It is knowledge by direct, immediate experience. The kind of knowledge you get from a lecture or from a scroll that the Greeks had a word for that, episteme, propositional knowledge.
Facts and figures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But gnosis. Gnosis is the ultimate reality check. It's what your inner spiritual faculty, what they call the nous, has to grasp directly. It's a knowing that fundamentally changes the knower.
And what if an entire civilization, ancient Egypt, from the pharaoh all the way down to the farmer by the Nile, what if it was all built on the quest for this gnosis?
Or at least on building the structure that protected it. That's our mission in this deep dive. We're taking the sources, the funerary texts, the records of priestly life, that later Hermetic wisdom, and we're going to try and explore this meticulously designed spiritual machinery.
We're looking for that hidden structure.
We want to understand how their belief system was just woven into every single part of daily life, how it shaped their politics, and what secrets those high priests and the initiates worked so hard to preserve.
It's a deep dive into the inner workings of a spiritual life that was never meant to be forgotten.
Let's start at the top.
To really get this architecture, we have to start at the absolute apex of power, with the king of the gods himself, Amun-Ra. But he didn't start out that way, did he? How does a god go from being this sort of whispered concept to the supreme force in the most powerful empire of its age?
Well, what's so fascinating about Amun's journey is that it's deeply political, it's military, but it's also philosophically very subtle. He probably started as just one of 8 foundational deities in the Hermopolite creation myth.
One of 8.
And his specific job was to represent the concept of hiddenness, the invisible, the atmosphere. He was the potential, the force that was concealed but everywhere at once, the divine presence you couldn't easily see or name.
That sounds, almost academic, like a god designed for quiet contemplation in a library, not one to lead an empire.
Right. So how does that deity become the battle standard for a newly victorious nation?
Yeah.
Well, that transition is tied directly to the rise of Thebes. Amun's worship just exploded in national importance after the Theban rulers, specifically Ahmose I in the 16th century BC, successfully led the rebellion that kicked out the Hyksos invaders.
So as Thebes becomes the capital.
As Thebes becomes the new center of the world, their local god, Amun, had to be elevated. He had to match the nation's new global status.
And the way they did that was this ultimate theological merger.
Exactly. Amun fuses with Ra. Ra, the ancient, glorious, visible sun god, and this creates Amun-Ra, the self-created creator's deity par excellence.
The king of the gods.
The king of the gods. And this merger, which they maintained all through the New Kingdom, was just brilliant. It connected the invisible potential, the hiddenness of Amun.
With the visible, life-giving power of the sun, of Ra.
Precisely.
So on one hand, you have this truly transcendent, supreme, almost inaccessible god. But then you look at the sources and they show Amun-Ra was also the most accessible god for the ordinary person. That seems like a contradiction.
It creates a wonderful theological tension, doesn't it? While the pharaoh and the high priest were dealing with Amun-Ra, the cosmic force, the average person was praying to Amun-Ra, the champion of the poor.
The wazir of the poor.
That's what they called him. Unlike, say, the pharaoh cult, which was very remote and political, Amun was seen as the immediate source of mercy and help for anyone in trouble.
And we have proof of this, not just in the big state hymns, but in the private, personal prayers of individuals.
We have some incredibly moving examples. There are prayers that petition him as who comes at the voice of the poor in distress, and who gives breath to him who is wretched.
Wow.
The theological message there is so important. It says that even if you've sinned, even if you brought trouble on yourself, Amun was still willing to forgive you. He was a protector who operated outside the social hierarchy.
The sailor's hymn you mentioned before really captures this. I think it sets up this contrast between, the overwhelming chaos of nature, a storm at sea.
And the immediate personal power that comes through faith. The language is so evocative. It says, the tempest moves aside for the sailor who remembers the name of Amun. Thanks to him, the single man becomes stronger than a crowd.
It's not about the state ritual at that point.
No, it's the individual's devotion that brings immediate protection. For you listening to this, that contrast is key. It shows how the massive state religion and your own personal spirituality could interact day by day.
And all of this immense power, both political and personal, it flowed directly through one channel, the priesthood. If Amun-Ra was the engine of the universe,
then the priesthood was the maintenance crew. They were the architects of cosmic order. And their power was, well, it was enormous. They operated in this huge specialized hierarchy.
And at the very top.
At the top was the high priest of Amun at Karnak. In the New Kingdom, these guys were effectively political magnates. They managed vast temple estates. We're talking land, laborers, grain, gold. And their authority often rivaled and sometimes even exceeded that of the pharaoh.
It wasn't just about managing wealth, though. Their core job was about maintaining Ma'at. That concept is so central. It gets translated as justice or truth, but it's so much more than that, isn't it?
So much more. Ma'at is the foundational principle of all Egyptian existence. It's truth, yes, but it's also balance, order, and cosmic harmony. The entire purpose of the state, of the priesthood, of the pharaoh himself was to actively maintain Ma'at.
And if they failed...
If they failed, chaos's fit would rush in. The universe, both the political world and the celestial world, would just unravel. The pharaohs themselves were seen as the earthly embodiment of Ma'at. It was their primary responsibility.
Okay, so if the fate of the cosmos is literally resting on your shoulders, the daily life of a priest must have been an absolutely rigorous, non-stop initiation.
Oh, it was an all-consuming vocation. It was all centered on ritual purity. The discipline was absolute. You had to be ritually fit to even approach the sanctuary.
What did that involve?
It meant constant purification, frequent bathing in sacred pools, maybe 4 times a day, sometimes more. And crucially, the complete removal of all body hair. They shaved their heads, their faces, their entire bodies.
That focus on purity, on separation, the shaving, the bathing, it was all meant to distinguish them from the messy mortal world outside, right? To make them suitable vessels for the divine.
It transformed them into a different class of being. And their ultimate task every single morning was the sacred awakening ritual. You have to picture the scene. The sanctuary is sealed, it's silent. Only the highest-ranking priest could ever go inside. This wasn't just, dusting off a statue.
It was a magical act.
A magical act of reanimation.
Shall walk us through it. What was the mechanism for bringing the deity's Ka back to life?
The high priest would break the clay seal on the door of the innermost sanctum. He'd enter, approach the statue of Amun, and begin to recite specific hymns. He'd burn specialized incense and then present the offerings. Mounds of fresh bread, jars of beer, fruits, vegetables, the best cuts of meat.
And the belief was that the god's spirit,
the god's Ka, its spiritual essence or life force, would literally absorb the spiritual essence of those offerings.
So the god takes the energy but leaves the physical food behind.
Precisely. And this created a perfect spiritual and economic loop. Once the god had absorbed the essence, the physical food was taken back out and systematically redistributed down through the temple hierarchy.
From the high priest down to the laborers.
First to the high priest, then the lower ranks of priests, and finally to the temple workers. It reinforced the entire social structure, physically, economically, and spiritually.
But the public, the people outside the temple walls, they needed to see that this cosmic maintenance was actually working. They needed reassurance.
And that's where the Opet Festival came in. The Opet Festival was the great public performance of Amun's power, the most spectacular ritual of the year.
So what happened?
Every year, the statue of Amun, along with his consort Mut and their son Khonsu, was carried in a grand procession from his main temple at Karnak, down the Nile to the Luxor Temple in Thebes.
It sounds like this massive floating affirmation of cosmic order.
It absolutely was. It was carried on these huge ceremonial barges, or later, on the shoulders of the priests. The procession physically linked these two sacred sites, and it embodied the divine presence in the earthly realm. It allowed the common people who could never enter the inner sanctum to actually participate and see the visible proof that Ma'at was being maintained.
A moment of national spiritual renewal.
A total renewal for the entire community.
Okay, so Amun-Ra represents this ultimate hidden cosmic order. Let's shift gears now to the active force, the creative, manipulative power that runs through this whole system. Let's talk about Hathor.
Yes, if Amun established the rules of the universe, Hathor was the foundational power that made the rules work.
We have to completely redefine magic here, don't we?
We have to. In the modern mind, magic is.
Yeah.
It's trickery, it's illusion, it's something that goes against the laws of nature. For the Egyptians, Hathor was the exact opposite. It was the law of nature. It was applied cosmology.
It was a divine force, even deified as a god itself, that was believed to have existed before duality had yet come into being. It was the primary energy of creation.
So when a priest, or even just a regular person, used Keka with a spell or an amulet or a ritual, they weren't performing some kind of dark art.
No, they were using the universe's core operating system, a system sanctioned by the creator God himself. It was applied theology, and it was used for everything from huge state protections down to really practical private goals, like healing a scorpion sting or ensuring a good harvest.
And the master of this force, the deity that is just synonymous with the power of Heka, was Isis.
Isis, the great lady of magic, Wesekau.
How did her stories, her mythology, cement that role for her?
Her power was always intrinsically linked to her words. Her ability to speak, to know secret names, and to command the fundamental forces of the universe. We see this most powerfully in the whole Osiris myth cycle.
Right, when she resurrects him.
Her cunning use of words to find all the pieces of her dismembered husband, Osiris, and then, to resurrect him just long enough to conceive their son, Horus.
Her speech was literally generative. It created life.
It was effective. It worked. And it's through her powerful speech that she protects Horus from his uncle Seth's schemes. In the later funerary texts, you see her using very specific words of power. She addresses the four sons of Horus, the canopic jar gods, not just his spirits, but she commands them.
She gives them orders.
Through the sheer force of her word, she orders them to guard Osiris and subdue Seth's allies. She even tells them where to send the enemies for execution. This isn't just protection, it's active command over other divine beings.
So from Isis's active command, we move to the keeper of those powerful words, the ultimate scribe of secrets. We arrive at Thoth.
Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, writing, and knowledge. He wasn't just the inventor of hieroglyphs. He was the keeper of all records, celestial and earthly. And as the Egyptian state evolved, especially into the Late Kingdom, his mystique just grew and grew.
He became more than just an administrator.
Much more. He became the master teacher of hidden knowledge. He started getting these incredible titles like twice great, or even thrice great, which is, a direct precursor to his later Greek incarnation.
And this secret knowledge was preserved and taught in specific places, these mystery schools.
They were called the Houses of Life. These were often attached to major temples, and they served as these specialized institutions where scribes and high priests were trained not just in, reading and writing, but in magical, medical, and astronomical knowledge, the occult arts of the state.
And this was all considered esoteric knowledge.
Oh, very secret, protected, transmitted only to the initiated. And what's really fascinating is that even during the radical religious upheaval of Akhenaten's reign, the so-called Atenist heresy Thoth's role seems to have survived.
No, you think that is?
It points to how essential his function was. Thoth represented the principle of intelligent order, of record keeping. Those are systems that are too critical to the state to just abolish. Even when you're trying to overhaul the entire pantheon of gods, he was the constant thread of intellectual tradition.
And that enduring tradition is what really sets the stage for Hermeticism. This is the synthesis where the Egyptian Thoth becomes the Greek Hermes Trismegistus. And this is where we get that crucial distinction again. Episteme versus gnosis.
This is the absolute heart of the secret path. Episteme, propositional knowledge, is just accumulating facts. We can know how the priests ran the temple or how to build a pyramid using episteme.
Right.
But that kind of knowledge, it leaves the biggest questions unanswered.
It's the kind of knowledge that can make you an agnostic.
Exactly. You can know about God, but you don't know God. But the Hermeticist, the follower of Thoth, was not satisfied with that. They wanted the direct experience.
Right.
Gnosis, knowledge by direct acquaintance. It is realization, not just belief. We often cite Carl Jung's famous line for a reason. When he was asked if he believed in God, he said,
I don't believe, I know.
And that level of certainty only comes from an internal transformative experience.
That's what the Hermetic initiate was seeking.
Yeah.
The ultimate knowing of the divine source.
Yeah.
And the vehicle for this direct knowing is something called Nu.
Nu. It's often translated as mind or intellect, but it's much deeper than that here, right?
Much more profound. It is the spiritual capacity, the universal light or divine intelligence that permeates all of reality. The core goal of the Hermetic path, of the ascent, is for the initiate to realize that the small, limited inner light inside them is fundamentally identical with the boundless universal light of Nu.
So the whole spiritual struggle is about stripping away the illusions of the physical world until you recognize your own inner light as part of that greater source.
Precisely. And when that realization hits, the initiate is said to ascend beyond the 7 planetary spheres and reach the ultimate source, the one or the good. But this isn't achieved through ritual or sacrifice. It's achieved through intense internal, spiritual, and intellectual effort.
Which brings in this profound requirement for silence. The greatest mysteries can't just be shouted from the rooftops.
Gnosis demands silence and meditation. The Hermetic texts are very explicit about this. They say that Nusit conceives speech or divine command in silence. This kind of knowledge cannot be taught in the normal way. It has to be generated from within.
Through the spiritual struggle of the pupil.
Yes, through what some other traditions might call the great doubt, where all your previous assumptions are just shattered. It's a non-transferable transformation. And when the pupil finally achieves this realization, the texts describe it in almost violent, ecstatic terms.
Mania. Divine madness.
Exactly. A state of ecstatic, altered consciousness that just transcends normal mortal sight. The pupil, a character named Tat, after he receives this teaching, he exclaims this incredible thing. He says, "I now see not with the eyes, but by the operation of spiritual energy. I am in heaven, in earth, in water, in air. O Father, I see the all and I see myself in Nous."
It's the total dissolution of the self into this universal light.
Total. And that complete transcendence of the physical body loops us right back to that most enduring of all Egyptian concepts. That death itself is not an end. It's just a creative transformation.
The Hermetic tradition really just inherited and codified what the Egyptians had believed for millennia, that death is an illusion.
Right. Nothing truly perishes. There is only creation, change, and transformation.
Right.
At its core, it was a supremely optimistic system about continuity, but only if you understood the underlying spiritual laws.
Okay, so if Hermeticism was the philosophical path for the living elite, the ancient Egyptians formalized the path to transformation after death into the most complex ritual process the world has ever seen.
It really was. When an Egyptian died, they didn't just cease to be. Their very being disintegrated into these different modes of existence, the Keperu.
So death was like a spiritual disassembly.
A total disassembly. And the funerary rituals were this meticulous, multi-stage magical process designed to reintegrate all those fragmented parts, to ensure the deceased could navigate the underworld and achieve that eternal blessed state.
Let's break down this inventory of the soul, because the success of your afterlife depended on preserving and nourishing every single component. We have to start with the physical.
We start with the Sa. That's the idealized, transformed physical body. You achieve that through mummification. The priests weren't just preserving a corpse. They were magically transforming it into a divine, imperishable form. The Book of the Dead is full of specific spells just to help with this preservation.
Then you have the life force, the person's engine, the Ka.
The Ka was the spiritual double, the life force that stayed in the tomb, connected to the body. And crucially, the Ka needed to be fed. It required regular offerings of food, water, and incense from the living relatives.
Which was risky.
Very risky. If your family forgot you or died out, your Ka would starve. So the funerary text had built-in safeguards, like Spell 105, which was specifically designed to supernaturally satisfy the Ka, even if the physical offerings stopped coming.
And then there's the Ba, the one we so often see in the art.
Yes, the Ba, the free-ranging spirit, often shown as a human-headed bird. The Ba gave the deceased mobility. It was their personality, their ability to interact with the world. Spells 61 and 89 were all about making sure the Ba could successfully go forth by day from the tomb.
To visit old favorite places.
Exactly, and then safely return to the Sa and the Ka in the tomb at night. Without the Ba, you were just trapped, immobile for eternity.
We also can't forget the more abstract parts, like the Shut and the heart. The heart was critical.
The Shut, or shadow, was a vital part of you, protected by its own spells. But the heart was central. It represented your intelligence, your consciousness, your memory, and your morality, the sum of your life.
If the physical heart was damaged during mummification, they would place a jeweled heart scarab in its place.
A magical backup.
A magical backup to make sure you had the right information to give at the final judgment.
And if you managed all this,
Yeah.
if you preserved and nourished and reintegrated all these parts, what was the final goal?
The Ak. The Ak was the goal. If all these Keperu were successfully brought back together, the deceased achieved this blessed transfigured state, a powerful, magically potent spirit dwelling among the gods. That was the ultimate initiation into eternity.
And the roadmap for this whole journey, this incredible trek through the underworld, was the Book of the Dead.
We have to remember, this wasn't one single book. It was a personalized collection of spells and knowledge designed for transformation. And it was part of a tradition that stretched back for thousands of years,
It evolved from the pyramid texts.
which were only for royalty, and then the coffin texts. And these weren't stories. They were practical, instructional, protective magic. Spells and secret knowledge placed right in the burial chamber to guide the deceased.
And those earlier coffin texts gave us the first real map of the afterlife, didn't they?
They contained over 1,000 spells. And most importantly, the Book of Two Ways. This is arguably the earliest known cosmography, an illustrated map of the underworld. These maps were often painted right onto the floor of the coffins.
A literal guide.
A visual guide showing you how to navigate the lakes of fire and the various gates and dangers of the afterlife. It was your personalized survival manual.
So equipped with your magical map and the transformation of your soul parts, the ultimate test still remained. The final initiation before the gods.
The judgment. The moment of truth before the tribunal led by Osiris. This was the final check on your Ma'at. Your heart, representing your life's deeds, was weighed on a giant scale against the feather of Ma'at.
And if your heart was heavy with wrongdoing.
If it was heavy with Isfet, it was devoured by the monstrous Amut, the devourer of the dead. But if your heart balanced with the feather, you were granted eternal life as an Ak.
The entire civilization's spiritual effort came down to that one moment of moral reckoning. And the god presiding over it all, the divine template for this whole rebirth, was Osiris.
Osiris, the resurrected god of the underworld. The whole ritual process on Earth was designed to identify the deceased with Osiris, to make every dead Egyptian a version of the god himself, ready for their own rebirth.
And the famous opening of the mouth ritual was the final critical act in that process.
Yes, the OMR. It focused on the magical reanimation of the mummy. Priests would use these specialized instruments to touch the mummy's mouth, nose, eyes, and ears, magically restoring all the deceased's senses so they could speak, breathe, and see in the afterlife. And it's important for you to remember, this whole idea, this democratization of the afterlife, it's spread. It started with royalty, but by the 5th dynasty, we see high-ranking officials and other non-royal individuals getting the same treatment. The promise of eternal life was extending beyond the palace walls.
We've laid out this grand scale, the hidden king Amun-Ra, the secret knowledge of Thoth, this colossal industry of the afterlife. But if this spiritual architecture was truly a 247 thing, how did it filter down to the average person, the one who wasn't a high priest or a noble?
And that is such a vital layer to understand, this decentralization of piety. While the massive temples defined the state religion, there was this robust, vibrant layer of personal domestic religion happening, especially from the New Kingdom onward. People needed immediate daily access to the divine.
Not just through the remote pharaoh.
Right, and so the household shrine became the localized temple.
What were these like?
There were small, often intimate altars found right inside family homes. They'd be dedicated to specific household gods like Taweret, the protector of childbirth, or Bes, who wards off evil, or, very importantly, to family ancestors. These shrines were where daily rituals and offerings happened. Domestic spirituality was just as important as state worship.
And archaeology has given us this rare, incredible glimpse into this practice at a place called Tel Edfu.
It's an invaluable discovery. At Tel Edfu, they unearthed the large urban villa from the early New Kingdom around 1500 BC, and inside was a beautifully preserved domestic shrine dedicated to family ancestors.
Yeah.
And the context was completely undisturbed.
So we can directly connect the space to the activity?
Exactly. We can reconstruct what they were doing. Given the size of the villa, it was probably a high-status family, maybe local officials. But what's so significant is that this shrine is centuries older than the famous workers' village at Deir el-Medina. It's one of the oldest, clearest examples of New Kingdom ancestral worship happening right inside the home.
So honoring your ancestors, your Aku, was a daily practice.
The daily, institutionalized practice necessary for domestic harmony and protection.
The cult of the dead wasn't just something that happened out in the necropolis. It was a continuous kinship.
A constant conversation.
The living were constantly interacting with the dead. This was done through things like the letters to the dead. People would write out requests or complaints or pleas for help on pottery bowls and leave them in the tomb. We also see these antipoid busts, small sculptures of the ancestor that were kept in the home as a physical focus for interaction. It ensured that family loyalty just extended seamlessly across the threshold of death.
This personal need for help and protection also showed up in objects that everyone could get their hands on, votive offerings and amulets.
Votive offerings were a way for anyone to establish a lasting personal relationship with a god. You didn't just pray, you dedicated a small object in a sacred area to make sure your request or your gratitude remained physically present before the deity.
This was a common practice.
Very common from the earliest periods, and it became highly visible in the New Kingdom, in the outer, more public areas of the big state temples. And what's crucial to understand is that the symbolic power of the object mattered far more than its material cost.
So a poor farmer could participate just as effectively as a rich merchant.
The sources are clear on this. A farmer could dedicate a small pottery cow to symbolize their prayer for fertility and prosperity, and that symbolic connection was what was paramount. We find thousands of these miniature vessels, little animal figurines, simple faience amulets, all representing personalized prayers for health, fertility, protection.
So the amulet was the ultimate piece of portable magic. It was Heike made tangible and accessible for everyone.
They were intrinsically powerful magical objects. They weren't just jewelry, they were encapsulated spells. And their power was so widely accepted that they were mass-produced locally and exported all over the Mediterranean. They kept their perceived potency, even when worn by foreigners.
It shows how that sophisticated system of Heike was available to solve immediate, everyday, mundane problems.
And this mingling of the sacred and the domestic was incredibly durable. We have records from Roman Egypt, centuries and centuries later, showing a woman managing a shrine to Isis, living with her son who was a local priest. For almost 3,000 years, the home was this primary laboratory for religious and cultural continuity, making sure these beliefs survived, no matter who was in charge politically.
It's so tempting to view Egyptian civilization as, a closed chapter, something that ended when the Greeks and Romans arrived. But this spiritual architecture didn't just vanish. It proved incredibly resilient through syncretism.
That adaptability is the key to its survival. Egyptian religious concepts were so foundational, they integrated dynamically with foreign deities. They formed these new syntheses that spread far beyond the Nile.
So Amun-Ra, the hidden king, he becomes an international star.
He becomes Zeus Ammon, or Jupiter Ammon. He was particularly associated with the remote Siwa oasis in the desert, which had a famous oracle. This was a major pilgrimage site for Greeks for centuries. The Spartans consulted the oracle, the poet Pindar honored him.
And Alexander the Great himself went there.
Alexander made a dramatic pilgrimage there, seeking divine confirmation of his kingship. This fusion kept Amun's supreme authority alive under a new name.
And Isis. Her evolution was maybe even more profound. She goes from being a goddess on the Nile to presiding over these huge, widespread Hellenistic mystery cults.
Her worship absolutely exploded across the Greco-Roman world. The mysteries of Isis were so popular that classicists often see them as something distinct from, and even more compelling than, traditional Roman or Greek state religion. Her identity as the grieving, powerful mother, the patron of sailors, it resonated universally.
And her cult offered a kind of personal salvation.
Exactly. A path to salvation that was incredibly attractive during a time of big imperial uncertainty. And the ultimate measure of that persistence is that her cult was the last bastion of traditional Egyptian religion left standing.
The story of the temple at Philae.
It's an amazing testament to endurance. As Christianity became the state religion and the money for the old temples dried up, most of the Egyptian cults just collapsed. But the Temple of Isis at Philae, way down south near the border, was uniquely supported by Nubian worshippers.
They kept it going.
They maintained an organized priesthood and regular festivals until at least the mid-5th century CE.
The mid-5th century. So that means traditional Egyptian festivals were still being performed centuries after Constantine made Christianity the state religion.
It makes Philae arguably the last fully functioning traditional temple in Egypt. It was eventually converted into a church, but its persistence just shows that this spiritual architecture could withstand massive political and religious pressure.
Okay, let's pivot for a moment away from the grand temples and the magic to the ethical wisdom, the part that persisted outside the strictly arcane spheres, the literature of Manat.
We're talking about Savate, or instructions,
Mhm.
Egyptian wisdom literature. This whole body of work provided this timeless ethical and moral philosophy derived directly from the concepts of Ma'at, and it was intended to teach people how to live well in the visible world.
And the gold standard here, going all the way back to the Old Kingdom, is the Maxims of Ptahhotep.
Written around 2350 BC, these maxims were penned by a vizier, Ptahhotep, for his son and for other young men who were about to enter government service. It's a practical guide on how to live a moral and successful life.
And the advice is universal.
Completely universal. It emphasizes the power of silence and careful listening, the necessity of truthfulness, the avoidance of greed and arrogance.
And the power of these simple instructions, don't be greedy, listen well, speak the truth, is that this was all preparation for that final judgment before Osiris.
Absolutely. The wisdom literature informed your daily conduct, which directly determined the outcome of the weighing of the heart.
Hmm?
Being a good person in life wasn't just a social virtue, it was cosmic preparation. The similarity between Ptahhotep's maxims and the moral frameworks in much later religious traditions, it just highlights the long, often unacknowledged influence of Egyptian moral philosophy.
The core belief that your ethical actions maintain cosmic order never really faded away. The visible ethical life was always preparation for the invisible eternal transformation.
Always.
We started this deep dive by trying to reject that postcard image of ancient Egypt. We were looking for the hidden architecture of their spiritual world. And what we found wasn't just a religion, it was a continuous, meticulously designed ritual.
We saw how the king of the gods, Amun-Ra, managed to be both transcendent and deeply personal. We saw how his cosmic order, Marat, was maintained by the rigorous, purified life of the priesthood. We explored Heka not as trickery, but as the universe's foundational magic, harnessed by Isis. And we traced that intellectual thread through Thoth to the concept of gnosis, that non-negotiable knowledge you can only gain through spiritual experience.
We detailed the ultimate transformation, that initiation into eternity, where the complex parts of the soul, the Keperu, were magically reassembled, guided by the maps in the Book of the Dead. And we realized that the spiritual intensity wasn't just for the big temples. It was lived out every day in the household shrine and encapsulated in the protective power of the simplest amulet.
The ancient world really suggests that reality is fundamentally spiritual, and that true mastery requires more than just accumulating facts.
So we'll leave you with a final provocative thought, and it comes directly from the deepest realization of that Hermetic tradition. If the highest wisdom gnosis must be experienced directly, if it requires an internal transformative struggle, a kind of divine madness achieved only in silence, does true mastery of any field today still require a profound internal initiation? Does the highest level of competence, whether it's in science or art or leadership, demand a realization that goes beyond the propositional knowledge we can read in a book, mirroring that arduous path from mortal life to the magically blessed Akh?
The Egyptians certainly believed that the most profound knowledge is always hidden, waiting not to be taught, but to be truly fundamentally realized.
Thanks for tuning into Sonara's Deep Dive. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any of our future episodes. I bring you fresh content every week. Thanks for listening.